in that moment, I realized what had happened. I realized what had happened with the 1988, with the 2012. Like, they just changed the prophecy in that, like, they changed their doctrine.
Yep.
Right in that moment. And I looked around and everyone was like, amen, amen. And I was like, and I almost myself, I even was like, amen. Like, it was so weird. But then I just realized, like, this is how they do it.
So how long were both of you in? I guess maybe kind of give like a snapshot of what your experience was in the group. So were you both in the same Zion together? Did you kind of come into it together? How did that all kind of happen?
Yeah, so Kayleen was raised she wasn't really raised anything. Some of her family was Mormon, but as far as herself, she's an only child. She has half siblings, but she was the only child of her mom, and that's basically who she spent most of her time with. So she wasn't really raised any religion. She was more raised just free spirited and spiritual, but not really religious. And so after high school, she went to Salt Lake Community College, which is just a local community college here in Salt Lake City. And they do kind of a club rush, if you're familiar with that. Basically, they set up booths and tables and stuff, and they have, like games to try and prizes and stuff to kind of get people engaged with their table. And so she came across deaconess, a Korean deaconess, and a
So I was just in between my classes, and I don't think it was a club rush or anything, but it was just I was in between classes, and just this Korean woman approached me, and it was the deaconess, and actually it was both of the overseers of the church, and they were like, she was like, "Oh, are you Christian?" And and I still, like, to be honest, I feel like I think, and Adam and I are both in agreement, like, we feel like they're victims too. I think there's a group at the top who, there's a handful of those who know what's going on, and for them, I don't really have sympathy. But for the most part, I feel like we want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I really think that they're, genuinely trying to do good. So yeah, we still hold them pretty dear in our.
Yeah, we love the members, and we never left because of the members. We never left because of the leaders. We love them dearly, actually. It sucks that
we love all.
We were cut off, but so to finish the story.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just in between classes, and she asked me if I was Christian, and I was like, I didn't really know what I was at the time, but I just said yes, and she was like, "Oh, do you have some time?" And so I sat down, and we studied the weeds and the wheat. Like, they had a little a whiteboard that they pulled out, and we in the cafeteria, and we just studied the weeds and the wheat. And at the end of it, I was like, well, I'm not really interested in religion or the Bible or anything like that. But they had mentioned that they do volunteer service, and so I was like, okay, yeah, like I would go to that. I would go to one of your volunteer events. And so I ended up going to this cleanup that they had. And I remember one of the things that stood out to me was they took so long to take the picture. And I was just like, it's almost like they took as much time to take the picture as like it took to clean up everything. And I was just, anyway, but I was really there just particular. So at that time, I was like, everyone was so nice, and I was definitely like love bombed and everything. That's kind of how I got roped into it, I guess.
So then you kind of convinced Adam to join eventually, is that right?
Yeah, so she was baptized just before Passover 2014, and then met me a couple weeks later. And over the course of us dating, she would ask me some bewildering questions and make really interesting statements. She would say something like, "Oh, do you know God the Mother is in Korea right now?" I'm like, "What? Like, who says that? Like, what?" And then she'd say, there's 144,000 who will ascend alive with Mother. And then also, did you know the Pope's the Antichrist? And, all these things where I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, just things you just don't hear normal people say, right?
Yep.
And then eventually she convinced me to go to the church, just be like, hey, come check it out. Cause, it seemed like she was pretty interested. She'd be gone all Saturday. So, cause that's the Sabbath. And I thought that was weird, but I was like, whatever, if this is your thing, this is your thing. I already did the LDS thing, and I was kind of atheist at that time. I was raised Mormon until probably about 18, and my whole family is still LDS and all that good stuff.
Okay.
And I remember, it was funny because I actually walked in the first time I walked in. They did the love bombing, we love you, and I went into a room and studied. I remember it was very interesting because it was in a strip mall. It wasn't a normal building like I'm used to, so it was in a strip mall. And it was just like a little office space. And I remember going in and sitting down. And if you know anything about the Mormon church, they have that big quad set with like the extra books. So I walked in with that bad boy, and they're like, "What is that?" I'm like, "Oh, this is scripture." I'm like, "No, it's not." I'm like, "Well, I'm about to tell you it's scripture." Anyway, so I wasn't really.
Yeah.
I was more so just going just to humor her, and they would
Okay.
do their studies with me. They would do Daniel, Seal of God, Revelation, all the things. I'm like, okay, this is cool and all, and great. You guys have, a religion, and she seems happy. Not really my thing. And then I remember them telling me that Second Coming Christ already came, the new name, all these kind of things, and that's where I was originally like, okay, you guys are getting a little too. You guys are reading into this a little too much, right? You're kind of getting a little too carried away with this, right? Saying that this Korean guy is second coming Jesus. Like, what are you talking about? And I remember that put me off a little bit. And I was just like, nah, I don't think so. And, my dad was also, really active in the Mormon church. So, of course, I would ask him questions. I'm like, I'm not really religious. I don't really care as long as she's happy and whatever, it's fine. I was just going to humor her. And then I kind of stopped answering the phone calls, started putting them off because it wasn't really my thing. And, believing in this Korean guy as Jesus, that's a little too much for me. And I believed in a Book of Mormon for 18 years. So that's, that kind of says something. But I remember for her birthday, so this is a year later, right? So she came in a year before I did. So this is a year later, just before Passover. It was her birthday essentially. And she asked me if I would go study the Bible one more time and just have my heart open and just really just try to understand it. And that's all she wanted, right? For her birthday, was a birthday present, was that. And and I remember I scheduled an appointment. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And I remember I actually blew that person off, right? I just didn't show up. And she was upset, and I felt bad because I was like, yeah, that was a pretty jerk move. Okay, I'll go and listen. And then what's interesting is I didn't know, and she didn't mean to, but there was like that emotional manipulation where
Mm-hmm.
she kind of made me lower my guard because,
That made you feel guilty.
I felt guilty, right? And when you felt guilty, you'd be surprised what you do. And so
Yep.
I felt really guilty, and I was like, okay, fine, yeah, I'll try, I'll listen and this and that. And I eventually actually ended up getting baptized like 2 weeks later, just before Passover, because it's before Passover, and they're like, if you walk out of here and you know about the Passover and you know about these things, and you walk out of here and you get hit by a car, what are you
Yeah.
going to tell God? You stand before Him like, I gave you a chance, right? So I was like, okay, yeah, and then we got baptized. So I came in actually a year after she did.
Okay. So yeah, that's interesting that you grew up for your entire life in Mormonism, but then there was something about the methods, I guess, that the WMS employs that it ended up hooking you in to what I would say is an even worse and more extreme cult than Mormonism. So I guess like what do you think it was for both of you? That was kind of like the major draw? Was it the fear that they kind of employed in saying, you have to do this now, and the guilt, kind of like you just mentioned? Do you feel like those were sort of the motivating factors, or what was it that led you to go from, skepticism about it and sort of apprehension, it sounds like, to, okay, I'm invested in this thing?
So for me, it was it was just I guess it was more just like the culture. So I had just graduated high school, and so I came from that kind of, like setting, and then I went, coming into this group where everyone's just like so happy, and so and it's like the gracious culture. Everything is gracious, right? You're supposed to talk gracious, and you dress gracious. And that's like their word is gracious. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what drew me into it. And there's just like a level of innocence to it. Like, I mean, imagine like a group of like 20-year-old adult women just talking about what kind of planet they want to have. When we go to heaven, I'm gonna
Yeah.
have this planet made of cotton candy, or just, and it just seemed like kind of a little bit like silly, but then these like you know like the overseers and stuff, they're like, yeah, this is true, like this is the doctrine. So I don't know, it was just
Or
kind of,
like what like the sisters would be like, I want to marry a Korean brother
yeah,
or something.
yeah,
It's just
everything
really
was all
weird, kind of.
Korean. Yeah, but then, so that's how it was at first, right? And then it just kind of changes. Like the more the more you kind of are like scared, right? You're scared to leave.
Yeah.
But that's what initially drew me in the beginning.
For me, it was, when you're a 19-year-old kid. So she was baptized just after she turned 18. I was baptized just after I turned 19. So you don't really know much about anything at that age, right? So when they're presenting these facts, right? Well, obviously, in hindsight, they were fabricated facts. But, with Daniel's prophecy, with all these different things, I mean, you don't really know how to combat that at 19, 18. You don't know anything about anything, right? You're never taught, you're not taught in school, you're not taught in church or anything, really what cult tactics are, or what,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really think to research it either, because you're like, hey, these people are nice. They're treating me like a king. They have good morals. They have good standing with society. They have upright character. What's there to look into? So you don't really
Yep.
think about that. And with all the things like you were saying, they have the guilt factor, right? Like, you are a sinner that committed grievous sin against God. They have the fear factor. If you leave, you will go to hell. They have the happy factor, where you go in and you're treated like a king, right? You're treated like a rock star. So you have all these inner workings, basically, kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, like tingling with all your senses, right? So it creates like a surreal experience to.
It almost like it's like an artificial, like it fulfills every aspect of your life artificially, right? You have a sense of purpose, you have a
Mm-hmm.
community, they like you have all these things that are
Sense
all
of
like check
family,
mark,
sense of
but
character
it's just like
development.
artificial, so. And I mean, I feel like they are, like, the members are genuine, but just,
The underlying
yeah,
principles are not.
well, the underlying motives, yeah.
Right. The motives behind what's happening, and what the end result is not what it seems. And what's interesting to me, Jordan, is I kick myself all the time thinking about it, because I left Mormonism because I didn't believe it. And I was like, this is crazy, right? But it the WMSCOG is actually very similar to Mormonism, but I would take my time in Mormonism 1,000 times over, to be completely honest. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, pre-existence, we're in heaven, right? Um, like a bunch of different things are very similar to how the LDS teach. Not everything, obviously. So, and if anyone's watching, don't blow up the
Yeah.
comment section.
Yeah.
But
So, to that point, you're saying you would take Mormonism over the WMS 1,000 times. Why is that? Why do you feel that way?
just because of the lacks, I guess. you're not threatened with hell every day of your life, right? You're not scared every day of your life. For the most part, I mean, the only thing I would say is really cultish about the LDS Church is some of their tactics. Yes, like they're they teach that you shouldn't go online and research the Book of Mormon or Joe Smith or whatever. But most of the weird things, honestly, are just what they do in their temples, like the baptisms for the dead that I did, their marriage ceremonies, those kind of things. That's kind of what's cultish about it. But honestly, if you just went to a Mormon church and you just went to a service, you would basically think it's the same thing as another church with a
Yeah.
little bit of different. Like just
Yeah.
I think it's
I
probably
would, yeah, I would
sorry.
imagine things like your requirements in Mormonism for things like tithing and the amount of time that you have to devote to the church. Even probably things like how the WMS kind of tries to separate you from any outside influences. From I guess I don't have a nearly as much experience with Mormonism as I do the WMS, but from the experience I do have, it seems like those things are so much less severe or prominent in Mormonism than they are in the WMS. And the
yeah,
WMS is just seems like a lot more controlling and manipulative and coercive. And just, I think
that's exactly
it beats down on you. It feels like the WMS is just so much more of just like a slave master in disguise. It's just so much more of a abusive relationship scenario than I think a lot of other cults, probably Mormonism or some of the more prominent ones like Jehovah's Witnesses. Even I think the WMS just seems to be another level of intensity in that way.
yeah. Yeah, I would say the tactics are similar, but like what you're saying, the severity and the amount that they're used is way different. They all use the same sort of tactics, but some use it to, a degree to where it's almost like criminal.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. That's what story after story that I've heard, that's where I'm always led to in these former member interviews when I hear, some of the experiences are more intense than others, but I always come away just thinking, how is this group functioning? How is this legal what they're doing to people? I mean, even just you take one element, the element of the financial loss that so many members experience through the clear manipulation that is involved. It just seems like, I wish something more could be done. Obviously, we live in a country that prioritizes religious freedom, which I think is good, but it has its negative consequences. I think when it comes to instances like this, where um, narcissistic, manipulative leaders are just kind of allowed to run rampant in the name of religion and get away with it.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like we gave probably close to 90,000 over the 10 years. Um, and what honestly is what eats me the most is not necessarily the money, it's the time spent. Time
Yeah.
is always more valuable, right? So I have nieces and nephews, and when I was in there, I never really got to see them because everything's on Saturday, right? And so now they're 20 years old, getting married and going off to college and the Navy and all these and Marines and stuff. And I'm just like, man, what happened, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
seems like yesterday you were, in grade school, and now you're going off getting married, and I miss everything in their life because I was either
Yeah.
preaching or I was either teaching or I was either leading service or whatever. So that's the thing that kind of hurts me the most, and especially when it comes to my dad. So my dad was in the hospital because he had lupus, and basically what happened was he was getting his lungs cleaned out, and due to something in the procedure, one of his lungs actually collapsed. So he was on a ventilator and basically hooked up to a bunch of machines. So his birthday came. It was August. His birthday is August 25th. In 2018, that landed on a Saturday, right? And his birthday was around 7 o'clock, which at that time, I believe 8 p.m. was the evening service. And we're in Salt Lake City, and he's in Layton, so there's no way we're going to make it. Because obviously, when there's service, you put everything, regardless of what it is, aside, to keep the service. And so my dad had his last birthday on Earth without me. So if you see the photo, everyone else is there except me. And so I just kind of think what was going through his head while he was sitting on his basically deathbed, right? Because everyone kind of knew what was going to happen eventually. And I just think to myself, what was going through his head? His youngest son wasn't there for his last moments. His last son didn't come for his birthday, right? And now being out, it honestly breaks my heart every time I think about it, because that was the last birthday he ever had on Earth. He died a few days later because his heart stopped, and that haunts me to this day. That I wasn't there for him when I needed to be, and I remember he passed away on a Friday, so it was about 6 days later. And I remember, like, I still had to go to Sabbath day, and that was probably one of the hardest things we ever had to do, because when you go to church, you're not allowed to show your emotions, right? Especially if you're a unit leader, which I was at the time. You're not allowed to show your emotions. You're not allowed to talk to people about your problems, right? Because nobody wants to deal with it, and nobody wants, someone to, sad or unhappy or whatever in the church. So I remember just having to just swallow it and just pretend like everything's fine. And I remember I had to I had to beg the overseer. Well, not, felt like begging, but I had to ask the overseer if I could go to my dad's funeral, because obviously my family being LDS, they're going to do it in the LDS church. And thankfully, I was granted permission to go to the funeral in the LDS church. But I remember specifically, like, at that time, if they told me no, I wouldn't have gone. So I would have denied him even if they told me I couldn't go. And I remember I couldn't even really be there in the funeral either, because whenever they're talking or praying or saying some sort of like hope-filled, you know, teaching or something, right? They taught you that when you go there and you're in the church and you're in Babylon, right? You have to basically just think of how wrong they are all the time, right? Like when they're praying, you pray over them, right? You're kind of like, it's kind of like Voldemort versus Harry Potter. Like, have you seen that scene? That's kind of like that's kind of like what's going on the whole time, right? So you're not really there. Yeah, exactly. You're trying to undo their spell, right? So I remember whenever they were praying, I couldn't really hear what they were saying because I was so busy trying to, you know, o- override whatever they were doing. And whenever they were talking and giving like gracious words of him being in heaven and something like that, I remember just having to think of how wrong they are. So even at the funeral, I really couldn't be there, right? Mentally, because that's how it was. And um and it's just surreal. And just thinking back on it now, of course, like, I didn't know any better. I thought I was doing the right thing, because the reason why I wasn't there, right? I know people are going to say, well, you could have gone, right? Well, but yeah, but people who are they know that if you have somebody who's sick in your family, they'll tell you that the best thing you can do is serve the church more, so Father and Mother will take care of them, right? If you serve more and you deny them more and you basically put them off more and serve the church more, that's actually better for them in the long run, because Father Mother will take care of them. Who knows? Maybe Father Mother will save them on the last day.
It's like the story of Noah.
Right. And so you kind of have that in your mind. And so when, in any family who's listening to this, who has members or as their family members in the church, just know that the reason why your family members are putting you off is not because they don't want to be in your life and don't want to participate and don't want to do anything like that. They are taught that the more they spend with the church, the more time and more they do, the more likely you as a non-believing family member will be saved on the last day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason, for that. And so that's why, I was not there for my family for 10 years, right? Because I was like, if I keep the Sabbath day and set a good example, they'll come, right? Or if I just follow father and mother to the very last burning flame of my life, they'll be saved on the last day. So even though I'm neglecting them now, they'll thank me in the afterlife.
Yeah, thank me later.
Right. But to them, to the unbelievers out in your family that are just looking in, they're like, wow, you've changed. Wow, you're kind of a jerk, right? You don't care about anybody. So I want to tell the members or the family members of those who have, sons, daughters, whoever in the church, that they're not neglecting you. They're not trying to put you on the back burner. They're separating themselves from you to basically save you. The more time they spend in the church, they're trying to save you. That's what it is.
Yeah, in a really weird way, that's actually a demonstration of their love for their family. And again, in a very weird, twisted way, because it's been twisted by the WMS doctrine, but that's the members thinking that they're actually doing the best thing they can for their family. But man, yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. I can't imagine how many others out there probably have similar experiences like that, where they've just, they have to live with choices they made and time spent away from family, or even in some cases, mothers having regrets about their children, and just different relationships that suffer just so dramatically because of this group. It's just one of the many things that makes the WMS just kind of another level of dangerous to people. But you guys talk about how when you got in and the love bombing, and kind of you have this initial experience of feeling like this is the truth, and excited about it. But as we all know, that pretty quickly changes. And so can you kind of talk about that process for you? I guess, like, when did you start to kind of notice a change? Like what changed, and how did it go from, this is a happy thing and the people are so nice here, to recognizing that, man, there's some issues here, and maybe I'm not so happy being a part of this thing?
So essentially it starts, right, whenever they preach to you, it's like, oh, all you got to do is eat Passover. All you got to do is keep Passover, right? And you're saved, right? Jesus said, you eat my flesh and blood, you have eternal life. Is Jesus a liar? And you're like, well, no, he's not, right? So, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it's like, okay, but for you to keep Passover, you have to be baptized, right? Oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. Well, now that you're baptized and you keep Passover, now that you're baptized and you keep Passover, well, now there's the Sabbath day that you need to keep. Okay, well, now I kept the Sabbath day. Oh, well, I need to keep the whole Sabbath day now. Oh, okay, I'll keep the whole Sabbath day. And then it's like, oh, well, now there's third day actually too. There's third day, Sabbath day. You're like, okay, and then, oh, actually, there's the 7 feasts in 3 times, right? So you have to keep the 7 feasts because they're in the Bible, so there's those too. Okay, cool. And then, oh, by the way, there's 29 5 a.m. early morning worship services and 29 evening worship services that you must come to as well. Oh, okay, cool. That's a lot, but whatever. Okay, I guess, oh, by the way, you have to tithe because you want Father's books, right? You want to read Father's books. You want to be enlightened and, get spiritually well fed and strong. But you have to tithe first, right? And then also you have to pay for the book. And so then pretty soon it was started as Passover, right? You just need to keep Passover. Then pretty soon you're like, okay, this is not what I was told before, right? This is like, And then on top of that, it's like, okay, well, now you got to study, right? Now you got to teach. Now you got to preach. Now you got to bear fruit, because you don't bear fruit, you go to hell. If you don't study, Satan's probably like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour, right? So if you're not equipped with the sermon books, the armor of God, you're going to go to hell. You know, also, if you're doubting the church because of something happening to you, that's Satan, right? If you're, you know, it's like all these things just start coming up. It's like, whoa,
Like a frog being boiled in.
yeah, it's essentially like a frog being boiled in water, because pretty soon, oh, only keeping Passover is like, you know, you wake up 10 years later, and you're like, what just happened to me? You know, it's surreal. It's like you went through
slowly, like,
yeah, it's like a very fast roller coaster that seems slow, but it's not enjoyable.
So yeah, it's like you don't really realize it. There's not like a point where you're just like, oh, this is, you know, it's just because they just slowly introduce so many things, and then you're just kind of like,
Yeah, and then
you're just
yeah, because you know, if you ever came and you preached to somebody and you're like, hey, by the way, here's a list of like 150 things that you need to do to go to heaven in our church, no one in their right mind would be like, sign me up, right? I want to do that. No one in their right mind would. And so the coercion and the withholding of information is very not good, you know, because at that time you're like, well, I believe Passover, I believe Sabbath, so let me just keep adding, let me just keep adding, keep adding. And then there's the fear of hell for everything. You don't keep the Sabbath, hell. You don't keep Passover, hell. You doubt father and mother, you're
if
probably
you
going
take
to hell.
a break for one day.
Yeah, you take. I remember one time there was mother's word where she said, "Oh, you worked for 30 years, right? But if you take today off and father comes, well, then it's all worthless, basically." And I remember thinking, like, wow, like, and I was indoctrinated at that point, and I was like,
You're like, I can't think this.
like you kind of just get used to God being a psychopath, right? Because you're like, you know, I don't see why hell for everything, but I mean, I guess the God of the Bible is a psychopath, so what am I to say about it? God's a psychopath. Right. I'm like,
God's thoughts aren't my thoughts.
Yeah, God's thoughts aren't my thoughts. I mean,
that's what they told us all the time.
You know, they say, oh, mother's just, you know, mother's a shadow of your physical mother's love. Like, but my mom doesn't threaten me with hell for everything, right? She actually knows my name, right? Like, she knows what I like to eat, you know, and she doesn't threaten to kill me all the time, right? Like, because I don't do whatever she wants me to do whenever she tells me to, right? I'm like, how is that a fraction anything? Like, so you just kind of you have a weird morphed sense of what love is. You have a weird sense of what and morphed sense of what faith is. You have, like, everything's just morphed weird, and it's just not. But you become okay with it because you're like, well, it's in the Bible. God's just a psychopath. That's all there is to it. You know, and that's kind of how you just get used to it.
Yeah, I'm not, you know, an expert on this by any means, but I am pretty confident that this is, you know, somebody who's very familiar with how, you know, the psychology behind abusive relationships. I think they would be seeing all kinds of similarities here between how this organization, the relationship between the organization and the mass of members, how it works, I think is just so similar to how like a relationship between an individual abuser and you know, an abused person plays out, where it stops to make any rational sense why you want to continue in that relationship, but you've just been so manipulated and coerced and deceived, and you don't even remember who you are. You don't remember what actual, you know, love and a healthy relationship should look like, and so you just don't really know how to get away from it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a quote that I heard once. It's the fear of loss is greater than the need for gain. And I think that's something that the WMSCOG capitalizes, because they put so much fear of loss in you because I mean, what can be a greater loss than heaven, right? So they basically put it in your mind like you're going to lose heaven if you want to gain freedom, right? And human nature, we fear loss more than like I fear losing something more than my need to gain something else. And so I think they take advantage of human nature in that sense because they put the fear of hell in everything, and so that overpowers any need that you could possibly have, right? Oh, you need some counseling. Well, right, you should be depressed, right, because you're a sinner who's condemned to hell, right? Or so everything is just on the basis of your hell, and so your fear of that counters anything else.
Yeah. And on top of that, all that blame and the guilt, it's all turned back on you. Any like the rational part of your brain that says something's not right here, any sort of expression of that is turned back on you, and you're made to believe that it's just gaslighting. You're made to believe that you're crazy, like there's something evil or wrong for you to think that. And so, yeah, you just lock yourself in your own prison. But of course, they're the ones who have and who do train you guys to continue to keep that door locked. But yeah, it's just it what all this is just what brings you back to just how is this legal? How are groups like this allowed to go on treating people like this? It's just it's what I think motivates me to keep doing these videos, because there's it seems like what can be done about it other than allowing people who have experienced it to come out and then say, hey, you weren't allowed access to the facts, to information, and so here it is, and hope that others will grab onto that and kind of be pulled out of that darkness. Which by the way, I was going to mention this at the beginning. You started, since leaving, you started your own YouTube channel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I would imagine that's some of the motivation behind it, right? Would be to give people the information that they didn't have access to.
Yeah, exactly. And basically what I do is I just research, right? So if you follow my channel, I mean, I'm kind of taking you on my journey personally. Most of the subjects that I do, I research beforehand, so I'm researching as I go. And so it's basically my journey as well as whoever is watching it with me. And I basically uncover biblical questions, biblical contradictions, fallacies, heresies, and really just present the information. And I'm like, look, if at the end of the day you want to be in the WMSCOG, at least now you have all the information. Knock yourself out. But I think if you're gonna devote your life, your family, separate yourself from your family, give money, give all this your life, everything about you to an organization, why not hear both sides? Why not research? Like in that's something that I wish I would have done years ago, right? And so and part of my and the reason why I started my channel too is it's healing for me as well, because I'm an analytical person. I have to figure it out. I can't just be like, oh yeah, I'll just not think about it. It doesn't work for me. So I had to really just study.
Untangle.
I mean, I probably spent close to maybe 100. Yeah, I probably spent like 100 to maybe even 200 hours just researching up to this point about all these different things that just held me down for 10 years. And just analyzing it, analyzing the Greek, the Hebrew, and just really trying to understand what the scriptures are saying unbiasedly.
And watching Jordan's videos.
And watching Jordan's videos, very important. Pit podcast, very important for you guys. And I also wanted to.
And real quick, what's the name of your channel? Go ahead and share that so others can find it. And I'll put a link also, description of the video so people can find it. But
yeah, it's called Finding the Alternative, and the reason for the name is because that is actually something that helped me get out. And we'll kind of go into that story. I don't know how much more time we have, but we can kind of start getting into that story, and I'll kind of explain how I came to that name, because it kind of fits what our coming out story was.
Okay.
So I don't know if we want to get into that now, or
Yeah. If that, especially if that goes along with my next question was just going to be about how, like, what were the things that kind of led you out of the group. So if that ties into how you develop the name, then yeah, great.
absolutely does.
Yeah. So I was the first one to kind of, I guess, come out. And what actually got me out was reading the original Green Book, right? The original Mystery of God and Spring of the Water of Life.
Okay.
I wasn't like I hadn't really gotten to the point where I was like tight, like, I mean, we were kind of like at the point where we didn't really know. We were just kind of like doing, everything, just going through the motions, I guess. And we're just kind of like doing the same thing over and over again. And then, so I was, they changed the new songbooks like a couple years ago.
Yep.
And so we got all these, the new songbooks, and they gave us the reason. They said that the reason why they changed like the lyrics was because of the 144,000. They said that they took that out because they didn't want people to feel bad. They didn't want like current family members to feel bad. Like if they had someone pass away in the church, they didn't want them to feel bad. And so I was like, okay, well, so I wonder if they did that with the truth books. And because I was like, it seems like there's so many things that they're having us do now. Like they're having us do like these online, it was called EDULMS, where you have to do all these like online courses.
A bunch of busy work.
Just so many things. And I was like, I wonder if maybe it really is only 144,000 that go to heaven. Because I just kind of was curious if maybe they had that in the original truth books, and then they changed the truth books to soften it for like the regular, for the members now. And so that's kind of what got me curious. So because I know we have access, like in our, church apps, we have access to those books, like to listen to the audiobooks and stuff. So I just was searching online to find like one of our church websites, with the books. And I just searched original Korean, because I knew it would have been in Korean, original Korean Mystery of God and Spring of the Water of Life. And then I just saw the PDF. And so I clicked on it, and then I saw that it was the NCP Church of God. But I was like, why do they? Yeah. And I saw that there was extra chapters.
Yeah.
And I was kind of looking at the numbers to see if the verses and the numbers matched, with the original, or with my book that I had. And I noticed that I had like 7th edition Green Book. And so anyway, and so at that point I was just like, oh my gosh, they lied. Like
I was defending it though. At that point, I was so in. I was defending it. I was like, no, the NCPCOG, they probably added it, right? They're manipulative. They're evil. They're this, because that's what we're taught. And I remember when you told me, I was denying it. Like, there's got to be a reasonable explanation. Yeah. There's got to be something. And honestly, I was shocked though. Like inside, I couldn't eat for a week. I was just like bewildered and depressed and had an anxiety attack, because like, that's a big deal.
Well, yeah, because those books are almost like the Bible, right? They're God's. So they always would say like, you can't add or subtract to God's word.
He's the root of David.
Revelation. Yeah, so that's basically what got us out, is reading the original book, because they always say, oh, well, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or else. But no, it was
the original
writings that actually caused us to.
So and how they play it.
Sorry, I was just going to say real quick, because I think this is such a big thing that even current members who may be watching might not be familiar with. But just to clarify, what's being referred to here is there were 3 whole chapters that were removed from Ahnsahnghong's the original Green Book. So chapters that he wrote, wanted in his book, the WMS, years later after he's dead and gone, decided to take them out. Now that's like you said, the Green Book being, almost or on the same level as the Bible. I mean, it's to the WMSCOG, it's God's word. That's a big
He's the root of
deal.
David.
That's a big deal.
Yep.
Yeah, he's the root of David. And like I said, when I found out that, I was trying to put together in my mind what the possible reasoning would be, right? But in reality, I was shocked. And I was so shocked that I couldn't eat for almost a week. And I just felt like, because when you go online, like they teach you, you're going to die, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're going to die spiritually, which in and of itself is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you go online, see what's actually going on, and then you leave, right?
Yeah.
So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And and a bunch of churches do this, right? Bunch of churches do it, right?
I think Shinshinji says that too.
Shinshinji says that,
The tree of
everyone that doesn't want you to see something tells you not to do that. So,
Yep.
and that for me was just extremely painful, realizing that, because you have to remember how they paint these books, right? They sing songs about these books, right? Like they say, his tears are on the burning page. His tears are dripping onto the pages, right? He's writing in blood. He fasted and worked while he was fasting, and with the little money he had, he bought ink and stayed up all night with the light of lamp and wrote these. So it's like you're playing it up like it's just beautiful, right? Except for those 3 chapters, obviously, right? That's
Right.
not part of that. I mean, it's just so absurd. You can't say that and then on the other hand be like, oh, but we removed 3 of them, right?
Yeah.
You can't say, oh, he came and he restored and revealed everything to his children, except the things we're hiding from you and removed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was,
It doesn't make any sense.
that was just, the point where I was like, okay, this, it's almost like we felt like we were cheated on, like it's like, okay, now I have license. Like I was good. I didn't try to like snoop around or anything. And like, I just came across this and now I feel like I have license to look at everything. But I think I didn't yet. Like I was like, let's just see if there's an explanation.
Yes.
First.
So I messaged the missionary overseer of Utah Zion, and I asked about it, right? And I even wrote a letter to Mother, actually, because I was so nervous and freaked out. And I was like, oh, this is the doubt. This is the hour of trial that they said would happen, right? And it's testing my faith, because everything's a test of faith, right? You're the problem, right? 3 chapters missing. It's not the church. It's you're the problem, right? So that's what I thought. I was like, it's my fault. I'm doubting because, but in retrospect, it's like I'm not the one that removed anything or did anything. But anyway, so I messaged the missionary and I was like, hey, there's 3 chapters missing from the Green Book. I kind of want to talk about this. And he's like, oh, sure. So we met. I think it was like a couple of days later. It was on preparation day, Friday. And we went to his office and we asked about it. And he said, oh, yeah, there are 3 chapters that were removed.
I don't think we asked about the chapters because I feel like we didn't want him to know that we went online.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. We just said something kind of generic, actually.
So we were just like, I told him, I was like, yeah, we just had some questions because I just kind of said like some of my family brought these points up and we were just wondering, about, because at that point, like when I saw those things, I was like, oh my gosh, maybe all those other things that, the rumors about our church, they're actually true. So I asked him about the 2012 prophecy and then the 1988. And I was like, were those, like, did the church actually teach the world's going to end?
Yeah. I remember that when we messaged, we kind of blamed it on family. Like, hey, my family's saying that the three chapters missing. Hey, my family's talking about 2012.
But it's funny because he wrote a letter to Mother. So I'm sure that he knew that we did go online anyway because
because I explained everything in the letter to Mother, and so
he probably was filled in on what was actually happening, but wasn't.
Yeah, no, he's probably like, you liars.
Yeah. Okay, so you were. Yeah, so you were asking about the 2000. You kind of swung it as you were just going to ask about the 2012 and 1988 prophecy. Is that because you read the missing chapters and became aware that Ahnsahnghong? I'm trying to remember for sure, but isn't that what was in the 3 missing
Yeah.
chapters, or at least part of what was in there, that Ahnsahnghong prophesied the end of the world.
Yeah. So at that point, I was scared to look online still. Like I was scared to look on any other like slander website, or like any videos. But I was like, okay, I can translate this. So I downloaded this like Google this photo translator app.
Mhm.
So I would take screenshots of every single like page on there of the missing chapters, and I would translate it to English. And I was just going through, and and I saw the 1988 was in there, and the 2012 was in there. So yeah, that's kind of, and I was like, oh my gosh, it was true the whole time. Like,
yeah. But then they just say, their excuse is like Jonah, right? Because Jonah preached to Nineveh destruction and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And they're like, so it actually is a fulfillment of prophecy if you think about it, because it didn't happen, just like Jonah. And it's like, that's
with the 1988.
Yeah, with the 1988. But it's like, okay, but what about the rest of them? Right?
But and then with the 2012, he was.
Christians kept Jonah in the Bible. They didn't remove it to try to hide that, I suppose.
You think that'd be one of the
unfulfilled prophecy?
Yeah. Yeah,
but and they did confirm that. No, they said that they didn't ever teach 2012. That's one.
They just thought it was the completion of the temple. It wasn't the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. And so, so then after that meeting, they put on. So he was like, we were kind of just like, oh, okay. And I think you were like satisfied with those answers, but I was still like really skeptical.
They put on the great sacrifice of Father heard from Heavenly Mother. And basically Mother's talking about Father's sacrifice and with tears and stuff. And I'm all bawling. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm so sorry. And Kayleen just like, I'm like, so it already started to have, like, there was a kind of like a chasm kind of already starting to be built.
Yeah.
Because
at that point I was like, they lied. And I just, that for me, that was just it. After that point, I was like, nope, I don't. So I was super just like skeptical of everything after that. But he was like, oh no, I'm, thank you, we're forgiven. And
I mean, that fear is real, right? That fear is not like I'm worried I might get in a car accident. No, that fear is like a paralyzing fear that you're going to be cut off from God's people and you're going to be sentenced to hell. I mean, that is a very paralyzing fear that they.
Yeah. So after that, we just kind of went through this period where we're just like we're trying to process everything. And I had just realized, I think I just realized at the moment I saw the chapters, like lying by omission, right? That's still lying.
I was still in denial, for sure.
Yeah. And so for the next like couple of weeks, we just like talked like so much about it. And we were just like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I remember I just felt so like, almost like dizzy. And I was just like, just realizing that my reality was, and I was just having to try to have this, like the cognitive dissonance, to figure out what, anyway.
I think your critical thought was coming back and your cognitive dissonance was wearing off.
Yeah.
And so basically we were trying to process, the reason behind it, right? Because there wasn't really a reason. The only reason we got of why they removed the 3 chapters is Mother said so, right? Father gave the books to Mother and said, basically, you're in charge, right? There's no written authorization saying this happened. There's no hint that this happened. The only thing they have is a reenactment video. But other than that, or a wedding photo, because that is very authoritative in the WMSCOG. But that's really all the evidence they have is a well, we were there, you weren't. This is what happened. Believe us.
Yeah. So after that, I just kind of started watching, like, because I was like, okay, well, I was hoping what he would say is like, yes, this is, they did, like, we did used to teach this. We did used to teach the 2012 was the end of the world.
Which he admitted for 1988.
He did. And then, so after that, I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to just let myself research. And so then I just started watching everything. Like I started watching the podcast first, because I remember being like, oh, Jordan, I thought you were like, a false prophet.
Oh, I remember scrolling
Yep.
past you and reading you, just being like,
Yeah.
look at that guy. Thinks he knows the Bible. Father, mother, smite.
But yeah, now we're
Did you
so
guys ever
thankful.
comment any hateful comments?
No,
No.
we didn't, because
Oh, that's too bad.
we didn't even click on your video.
Yeah, we couldn't click on it. We would just,
Okay.
as soon as we
Okay.
saw it, we'd be like, oh, scroll past.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she started binge watching Great Light Studios, and she started binge watching the Pit podcast. And I remember one that actually stuck out to us was Esperanza's interview.
Yeah.
Okay.
A little backstory. I actually met Esperanza when she came to Salt Lake City.
Yep.
So if you remember in her
Okay.
video, there was that panel that she mentioned about when she was on short term. There was a panel of a bunch of ex-Mormons answering questions about Mormonism, because if you're going to go to Salt Lake, right, you need to know how the Mormons are. So I was actually on that panel that was
Okay.
answering her questions. I mean, I didn't know her personally at that time, right?
Right.
But she actually quoted me in her video on Great Light Studios where she was like, yeah, there was this guy talking, and he said, like, the women are just used for making babies and cooking and cleaning and stuff like that.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
she was like,
That's paralleling
wait,
my
that's exactly what I'm being used for. Am I in a
No,
cult?
not
Right?
babies. But,
Yep. Well, that's what I said, right? So, and so she was
Yeah.
actually quoting me, and little did I know that I actually helped her get out while I was in.
Wow. That's
In
cool.
a way. We're actually really good friends now, me and Kayleen Esperanza, and actually Edgar too. I'm actually in a chat with Edgar and Ricardo and stuff, and Raymond and
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
so you
all,
and
all
all
great
of the
people.
Brave X members that.
Yeah. So she started binge watching, and honestly, I wasn't, though, because I was still just like, oh, we were forgiven once. What are you doing? Just go back and forget, and so she was really binge watching Great Light Studios. She's really binge watching the Pit podcast. And honestly, that was our conversation all the time, was bringing up things, right? And she'd bring up all these things like Esperanza's story, Corey's story, all these different stories that she was hearing and telling me. And to me, I was like, that's not the church of God. That's not our church. I don't know what church they went to, but that's not our church.
Because I told him, I was like, the church, like, there are a lot of cases where families do break up because of the church. So I don't want that to happen to us. And so I was like, I think we need to be on the same page about and like figure it out together. But he didn't want to listen. Like, he didn't want to listen or watch anything, but he was willing to listen to me and like my questions. And I was kind of like telling him this information in the form of questions. So, like when I'd hear something on, on the videos or something, I'd ask him, like tell him, but in the form of a question. And then that way
That's
he could kind of
smart.
like think about it.
Make it easier to consume for him.
But yeah, so we were kind of just growing apart a little bit, though. He was kind of like, nope, like we need to just get right with,
Yeah, we need to get right with Father and Mother.
Because the Passover was coming up.
Yeah, you need to stop dabbling in this, because this started a year ago, like almost to the very day.
Yeah, almost 1 year exactly.
And so Passover was coming up, and basically our consensus was, well, if Father and Mother are God, right, something will happen, right? Like on Passover, right, you'll feel something, right? We're grasping at straws, right, at this point.
That's what I was thinking, because like you're not, like, if you have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, like you shouldn't be able to take the tree of life, right? The Passover is the tree of life. So I felt like, well, maybe because I had looked online at that point, so I was like, if I feel something on the Passover, like if I feel some kind of weird way, then maybe that actually proves that it's right. Anyway, it was just like, that was
you were even praying for like a light to flicker.
No, that was a different thing, but
it's like something, like some sort of just like, hey, like let me know that we're on the right path.
What stands out to me about what you guys are saying right now is the genuine desire to not have to leave this group, to not discover that it's false. Like you were, it sounds like, just desperate to be given any reason to stay in it. And I think so, so many members that watch these videos, the ignorant assumption is that these members just had these evil motivations. They just wanted to go live in sin and live for the world, and all these sort of stories that they kind of create. In reality, I would say, 99%, if not 100% of the members who start to experience these doubts and questions, it's terrible for them. They hate it. They don't want to have these questions. They don't want to have these doubts. They don't want to leave the church. They just, their God-given brains won't allow them to just ignore the blatant, obvious, facts and questions that have come up that can no longer be avoided. I just think it's important to recognize it.
Yeah, we
Sorry, go
desperately
ahead.
didn't.
Oh, yeah, there's a little lag. Sorry.
There is a little lag. That's okay.
Yeah, it's a very painful and it's not a comfortable feeling. Like, you want to just figure it out and just be like, look, if Father, Mother, or God, let's just, like, we got to figure it out.
And we kept praying, like, whatever is the right way, whatever is the truth,
Right.
we're going to do it. Like, if it turns out this is the truth after all, like, we're going to repent and, do the right. But we're like, whatever is the truth, that's what we want to do.
Yeah. And so unleavened bread and Passover happened, right? I was happy because I was like, I haven't heard anything. Like, so I'm still staying far away from, the Great Light Studios. I'm staying far away from Pit Podcast. I'm still thinking they're evil and this and that. And so I'm like, oh, how'd you feel about Passover? And she's like,
the same.
It was the same. And I was like, come on.
I was like, no.
I was like, I was hoping something would happen on Passover. We just forget about it and just move on and be like, okay, let's go, continue.
Yep.
So
because it's scary, right? It's the prospect of leaving, this behind. It's just so daunting because you've built your whole life around it. Everything about not just in terms of your relationships and friends and all that, but your sense of self, your sense of what drives you in life, what purpose you have, and like all these things are just suddenly your entire existence is just like leveled, and you gotta figure out who am I even, and where am I? What is this world we're living in? It's just not all of a sudden everything that you had an answer for every single question you can imagine. You go from that to I don't have answers for anything. And it's a terrifying thing. And so I understand. It makes sense why you would feel so much hesitation and just wanting to be able to get one little, nugget of hope or motivation to just move on and just keep going. Forget about all these questions. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. That would be the much easier path to take.
And that's the one I wanted.
Obviously, you didn't go that way.
That's the one I wanted to take. I was fighting. If anyone's watching this, I am fighting for that option right now with every burning flame of my life. I am fighting for that at this point. Like, I am not on board with watching videos, researching anything. I didn't do it. I was like cognitive dissonance full force, right? Trying to combat, her reasoning, and so, Passover, the feast happened, right? Nothing, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but at that time in my mind, I was like, okay, nothing happened. So we continue talking, right? We continue bringing things up, asking questions to each other, right? And then I remember she came up in a conversation and she's like, I'm going to send a text message to all the leaders anonymously and just let them know this information. So that way they at least can see both sides, because you never see both sides. And I was like, no, that's a terrible idea. Please don't ever do that. And if you do
that's an awesome idea. Yeah.
Don't ever tell me about it. And then she's like, okay. So it was just a conversation, right? And so about a month later, so Passover, or not a month, maybe a couple weeks later, it's the third day, which we go to church on that day. And the group leader texts me and says, oh, missionaries coming to deliver the sermon. I was like, oh, that's weird. He usually doesn't come on this third day, but okay, cool. Right? Because remember, we met with him, and so he's kind of aware of our situation and stuff like that. And so, we're like, oh, it's a little weird, but whatever. So he comes and does the sermon, and he talks about like Armstrong and how Armstrong is wrong because he believes in sunset reckoning, even though Passover is at sunset. But when you're in it, you're like, oh yeah, he's so wrong because reasons, right? But at that time, I was like, oh, that's crazy because me and Kayleen were just talking about that, right? And I was just bewildered because some of the things he was talking about in his sermon, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was answering some of the questions we were just barely talking about. And I'm like,
wow.
crazy. I'm like, wow,
he
this
must
is
be
like
so inspired, right?
That's just divine intervention.
Revelation.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, like finally something like cool,
Father, Mother answering our prayer.
Exactly. That's what I thought.
How could he possibly know that information if it wasn't from God?
Yeah, exactly. And then so I'm just totally like, thank you, God, And then after the service, he comes up and he's like, "Oh, brother, how are you?" I was like, "Oh, good. Thank you for the sermon." Actually, me and Kayleen were just talking about those questions, so I'm glad you actually came and brought them up. And he's like, "Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Paul, Mother." And he's like, "Can I talk to you and Kayleen in the room?" I was like, "Oh yeah, sure," because there's like a Bible study room there. I go and get Kayleen, and she's acting a little weird, and so I go and get her, and I'm like, "Hey, missionary wants to talk to us," and she's like, "Okay." And so we go in the room, and then he's just like, "Oh, so how are you guys doing?" And we're like, small talk. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, really good. Like, thank you for coming. Like, that answers a lot of our questions. And, I really feel like, God's giving us answers." And so I'm mostly doing all the talking. Kayleen is like silent. She doesn't say anything. And, you know, and then the missionary says, "Oh yeah, and pray for me because on Saturday I'm going to do an education about, you know, some things like the 3 missing chapters, the changes in the new songbook, like the exact same things me and her were talking about." And so I'm like, "Oh wow, okay, cool. Like God is definitely like working and like here, right?" And so, and he's like, "Yeah, Satan is really just working. Satan's really just, out there prowling and stuff." And so I'm like, "Yeah, no, right? It's crazy." And then so we kind of, we shoot the breeze for a while, then we go home, right? Because it's after service. And on the way home, I was like, "Man, when missionary called us in, I thought you might have sent like the text message, but I know you probably wouldn't have sent that." And she was like, "Oh yeah, yeah." And so we're just laughing and we go home. So the next day is my birthday, right? So the next day is my birthday. It's a Wednesday. And so we go out to dinner, we have fun with family and stuff, and we're getting ready for bed, right? Because I have to work in the morning. And she's like, "Did you have a good birthday?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it was great. It was awesome." And then she's like, "I need to tell you something." And I'm like, "What? What?" She's like, "I sent a text message." And I kid you not, I almost died. She sent the text message. And I'm like, that's what it was. That's why he came.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he knew exactly what we were talking about. And I'm like, if you would have told me before service and he asked me into the room, I would have died. I would have just like, I would have croaked. And so I'm like, are you kidding me? I told you, don't do it. Number one, I said, if you do it, don't tell me you did it because now I'm an accomplice. And so now I have to have that. And that made it more terrifying because I had to have that in my conscience while pretending I don't know who sent that text message. So I'm like tied between the church, because I want to be faithful to the church, but I also don't want to expose my wife, right? Like, so It's like, that's a very painful place to be. It's like God or your wife. And I'm like trying to hang on to both at this time. And so we go there on Saturday because, you can't miss, right? And that's the hardest thing is because you can't miss. And so it's like, I don't want to go, right? Because I know what it's about now. I know what the education is about now. And so anyway, so we listened to Mother's sermon that morning, and there's actually 2 sermons that morning, and that never happened. And the first sermon which is Mother's word, it was about internet slander, right? About people basically, posting facts, right? And hurting the church. And then the second one was General Pastor Sermon. So it was like an hour and a half, which is not normal. So we watched the second sermon, which is General Pastor Sermon, which is basically like, it was basically the concept was when your parents tell you to do something, it's for your own good. And sometimes you don't need to know why. You just need to obey your parents, basically. So,
I think those videos were after, it was a Sabbath day after.
No, it was not Sabbath day. It was 100% that Sabbath. I remember because it scared me to death. So I know why these sermons are playing. And I'm just pretending like I'm just not aware of what's going on, which is very difficult. And then after the sermon, right, usually on the Sabbath day after the sermon, so it's about 10:30, 11, we have education. And I already know what's going to happen because the education is about the text message that my wife sent anonymously through a texting app. And so missionary gets up there, we start, and he just starts railing on this text message because it's like basically the point of it is calling out like Armstrong and how he actually restored the Passover, the changes in the New Song books. They're teaching Mother's going to die now, and they took out Mother ascending alive with the 144,000 from the New Song books, the 3 missing chapters. And it's like a list of things. And he's just like, yeah, this person, right? They don't have, right? Basically just shredding her character, right? Basically calling her Satan, an intentional murderer spiritually. And is just basically calling her the devil and Satan. And I just have to sit there and just be like, yeah, that person. Yep.
And he and I are the only.
And I'm like, I'm dying inside, right? Like I'm dying inside. It is like the worst form of torture you could ever do. And so I'm dying inside because I have to pretend like I don't know what's. I'm like, oh yeah, that person, bad. I hate that person. But that person's sitting right behind me, right? Like she's my wife,
Right.
And so it was a very just dark place to
But
be at that point.
everything I sent in the message, it wasn't like it was confirmed as fact.
He confirmed it in the education.
Because the one thing I did say was that the church is preparing for her to pass away, is what I believe, and so that was the only thing that they didn't like confirm. But everything else they confirmed. But they're like, but this is why, and so
Okay.
everything that I said in the message was actual, just like fact.
He said it was like he called it slander, but then literally confirmed everything that she said.
Like the removal of the 3 chapters, I mentioned that. I don't know if I have a copy.
The only thing is the reasons were different, but the events themselves were different. Like, yeah, we did take that out. Here's why.
And before I sent that message, oh my gosh, I prayed. So like I was just praying, and I was like, just please let me do the right thing. Like and I think it was even before the Passover. Because I knew I was planning to send a message, and before the second Passover, and I was like, just let the lights flicker or something. Like if I shouldn't send a message, like just please give me some sign. And I was just so like praying so earnestly, and I just put a lot of thought into the message. And I was like, okay, I feel like a moral obligation to send this because this is information that they should know.
Yeah.
For you to devote your life to something, you should know these things. It's not like the slander where it's like, oh, the church said this that hurt this member, which those are valid things, but it in the WMS's eyes, it's not a valid thing because prophecies are what. Anyway. Yeah, those are. So anyway, I just felt like a moral obligation.
So he basically confirmed everything that she said, and I remember very specifically where, especially when they answered the question about Mother, that was shocking because he basically said, we believe that Mother will ascend alive with the 144,000. But even if she doesn't, does it change our gospel? Is Sabbath still Sabbath? Is Passover still Passover? And everyone's like, oh man. I'm like, wait, what? Like,
yeah, so that
we were taught very specifically, and even in the new songs, that we would ascend alive. But now we're just playing it off like that's not a thing anymore. Like,
so yeah, that was also one of the reasons why I sent the text messages, because I wanted to know what their official teaching, like what their teaching was in regards to Mother ascending. Because I remember in the past, we had learned so many prophecies about how we were to ascend with Mother, right? We're to be like the ornaments or the virgin companions.
The bridegroom comes for the bride, not the bride, or not the waiting, the virgins in waiting. Right? So
yeah, basically the point is that we all like the 144,000 are supposed to ascend to heaven alive with the bride, right? With Heavenly Mother. And so this was like, when I had heard those teachings, I was like, okay, wow, the church they're committing to this doctrine. So they're, if this is wrong, then a bunch of people are going to leave. So that's part of the reason, like why, we were like, I was able to feel like, I could stay and do all those things. So I wanted to ask that, like what their official teaching is on that. But I knew if I just asked the overseer that directly, he might just say, oh yeah, like of course. but
You
I
want an
wanted,
official statement from
like,
the
I
church.
wanted like an official, like, from the head office, what is their teaching on that?
Dance.
And so one way, like, that's one way I figured that I could get that answer was by sending the text message, because I sent it to all the leaders, so they're all going to want to have that answer too.
And the
You know,
answer was shocking because they basically were like, even if, right? There was no even
yeah.
if.
So in that moment when they sat down to have the conversation, I was like, okay, all right, here we go. I'm gonna get the answer. Like, we're gonna hear the answer. And if he would have said, yes, mother is gonna, ascend, we still believe that, and we, that's our teaching. Like, we're all gonna go to heaven with mother. Like, I would have stayed in. I told Adam, like, we would stay in if they told us that. But at that moment, he was like, he said this, and I remember it very like like in that moment, I was paying such close attention. And he was like, okay, if somebody says to you, what are you going to do? Like, if Heavenly Mother passes away, then you should answer them like this: I believe I'm going to heaven with Mother. And then he later on goes, but even if, so we should have an even if faith. And then he gave a bunch of examples of like how Apostle Paul, he told the saints that we're all going to go to heaven and be changed. But Apostle Paul was, did that really happen? No, he was just saying that for encouragement. And so I was like, oh my gosh. In that moment, I realized what had happened. I realized what had happened with the 1988, with the 2012. Like, they just changed the prophecy in that, like, they changed their doctrine.
Yep.
Right in that moment. And I
Yep.
looked around and everyone was like, amen, amen. And I was like, and I almost myself, I even was like, amen. Like, it was so weird. But then I just realized, like, this is how they do it. That's how they do it. That's how they just.
There's always an even if, right? 2012, right? When these dates pass, they're like, oh, if you focus on a date, you're going to be destroyed. It's like, well, we didn't come up with the dates, right? Like, you're the ones who teach us the
You
date.
did. You did.
And they're like, if you focus on a date, you're going to be destroyed. So there's an even if, right? So even if it doesn't come, we still preach. Even if it doesn't come, we still yada, yada, yada. It's the same with Mother, right? Even if Mother dies, Sabbath, Passover, these basic things that you believe in.
Yeah.
By that time, honestly, I wasn't really paying much attention because I was scared to death. But,
and like what caused me to send the message, like, right, because I wasn't going to send the message. I was like, no, I'll just, like, let, if it's their time, they'll come out. But then I felt like, because we had this education like a week before I sent the message, like the Sabbath day before, and it was like, put your phone, like, all members need to put their phones, like, give their phones to the group leaders, no notes, like, and then they showed this, like, the preface of the women's veil, or the women's veil in the New Jerusalem.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, that book
against Mother.
So they showed the preface up on the screen, like on, just up in the projector, and they had it all blurred out except for like certain words in that. And so they were just doing education
They had
against
it blurred
that.
out.
They had most of it blurred out except for certain little like sentences or words. And at that moment, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is not okay!"
How bold can you be? I mean, that's amazing.
So
that
in that moment,
put that book in front of you, but they'll just black out some of the writings, and oh man, that's so frustrating.
So
I would be really curious to know what they blacked out or blurred out.
It was probably like 70% of it was blurred out, I would say, like 60.
Wow.
So in that moment, that's when I decided to send the message, because I was like, they're definitely controlling this information. Like, they're controlling all of the information. And the overseers, they're the ones, I feel like, because the overseers are the ones who are the most faithful, right? So they're the ones who would never look online. They would never do anything like that. So I think in a way, they're like more the victims. Like I would say the local overseers are like more the victims than the regular. because they are so sheltered from information. And I was like, okay, I need to send this because people are devoting their lives to this stuff. You know, we're devoting our life to something that's, and they're just straight up lying. And so I was like, okay, I have a moral obligation. I have to send this, just the facts. I'm not going to say like, oh, the Church of God is bad because of this. I'm just going to say the facts, and
because realistically,
then
we had a lot of good times.
Have a clean conscience going forward.
Yeah, because realistically, we had a lot of good times. We had a lot of memories and stuff like that. So it had nothing to do with that. It's just the deception.
Yeah.
And
and the message was like, it was just like, God bless you. Like, it was completely like in Zion, like,
Zion format.
Yeah, it was in the language. I was just like, I love, all the members. And so that's why when he had that education and he was like, whoever sent this is Satan, I was like, I did not mean to like come off that way at all. As
intentional
like
murderer.
And
that's what they said.
In my message, I was saying, like, I love all the members, I'm sad that this, that they're preparing for, don't do any, like, don't blame yourselves if she passes away type thing. And so anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a complete, of course, they didn't show the message, right? They didn't read the whole message. They just took parts of it and did their explanation of what's in it, right? They didn't read the whole message to the congregation. I mean, which makes sense. That kind of is the standard, right? Like, they don't show the text message and read it for what it is. They just pick and choose what they're going to explain and give their explanation for it.
Absolutely.
And then after this...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the story's not quite over yet.
Oh my gosh, it's like the beginning.
Believe me, I wish it was. I wish it was that easy. So now I have to carry this weight. And I say me because I had no say in it, right? So I'm carrying this weight. I'm pretending like, I'm going preaching still. I'm still doing whatever with this weight on me that I know what's going on. I know what happened. And so then comes Ascension Day, which is like about a month after Passover. And our son had the phone because, they're a kid. They like watching shows. So we took him into the kids' room just before the service. And basically we gave him the phone, just left it. And basically like the teacher would just turn it off or something.
No, I locked the phone. I didn't want him to cry if I took the phone away. So I just clicked the button to turn it off so that he still had the phone, but he wasn't watching a show.
And so basically, we have service, right? But we're sick at that time. And so we actually had to leave after the service. And so we get the kids, we go, and we're driving off. And my wife was like, hey, did you grab the phone? And I'm like, no, because it's my old phone, right? I don't need it. And she's like, well, that phone has a text message on it. I'm like, why on earth would you leave that phone in the belly of the beast with the text message on it? And it's my phone. So if they open it, they're going to see my credentials. So they're going to think I'm behind. And so I lost my mind, and another panic attack, right? So,
but it was you had a password.
I had a password, but guess what? Everyone has the same password. Anyone who's watching, I'm guessing your password is 1948. Just saying, right? Everyone has the same password, or 100 or 1440, right? It's one of the two. So anyway, we go there, and we go back because I'm not leaving that phone there, right? So she goes in and she grabs it, right? And and that's basically the end of the story for now, right? Because she says, "Oh, I opened it, and it's the kids app." And so that's the end of the story for now. We'll come back to this later. And so basically, I'm like, "Whoo, okay, no one saw it. We're still good, right? We're keeping up the image, right? We're still good." And then comes Pentecost, which is 10 days later, right? So Pentecost was an interesting one because usually Pentecost is like Holy Spirit, like the fruits of the Spirit and stuff like this. This one was different. This one was like the morning sermon was about like, and kind of the whole day was about like traitors and Korean independence fighters and basically like traitors who sold out Korea to the Japanese and stuff. So I'm like, this is kind of this is Pentecost.
Oh,
and that's like usually not the case. And so I'm like, okay, something's kind of up. So after service, I'm going and doing whatever, right? I'm with the men's group and whatever. And I noticed I hadn't seen Kayleen anywhere. And I'm like, where on earth is Kayleen? Like, I haven't seen her anywhere. And it's like almost lunch. And I'm like, well, I'll see her at lunchtime. I'm not too worried. Maybe she's doing something with the kids. And so lunchtime comes and I still don't see her. And I'm like, what is happening?
Wait, did you want to talk about like me and calling the sister?
Oh, we can come back to that later.
Okay.
But so essentially, I'm trying to find her, right? It's lunchtime. And I don't see her, but I also don't see the missionary. And I'm like, okay. And so I go and ask my overseer or my group leader's wife, because we were pretty close to them. And I was like, hey, have you seen Kayleen anywhere? And she's like, oh, I saw her go in the missionary's office a couple hours ago. And all the color drained from my face. And I was like, well, I guess I should start saying goodbye to people that I've known for 10 years. So I was actually making a list in my head of who I'm going to say goodbye to. And so I'm trying to act normal, but I mean, I'm sweating, I'm pale, I'm just like woozy, and I'm like, right? Like, I just don't want to be here. I just want to just disappear somehow, right? Just vanish into thin air. And so I'm pretending to just pretend like, I don't know. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. That's fine. I'm really glad she's doing that right now at this moment. I'm great. That's great. And so we're pretending, and I'm pretending to just go along with everything, but I'm dying inside. And so we're out in the fellowship was kind of, you can kind of see where the overseer study is from the fellowship. They call it the ocean area. And I see her come out finally, and she has a smile on her face. And I'm like, you're smiling. Why are you smiling? I have so many questions that I cannot ask you at this moment because I just can't, because everyone's watching me. And then missionary comes out and he's fine too. And I'm like, I'm so confused. I am ridiculously confused at this point, but I can't talk to her right now because service is about to start. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. Okay, whatever. So we go downstairs, we sit down for service, right? Everything's going normal. But I'm dying inside because I'm like, I am just so beside myself. I don't know what's going on. She gets up and does the offering, right? And collects the offering. And I'm just like, what? How? Like, what is happening right now? And so service concludes, and missionary comes up to me, and I'm like, oh, hi, God bless you, hi. And he's like, oh, God bless you, brother. Oh, I'm glad you could come, and talks to the little ones and leaves. I'm like, again, I'm just so confused. I don't know what to do. Like, my heart's beating, but I'm like cold and sweaty and hot at the same time. I'm just like, I don't know what is happening to my body or what is happening at all. I am so confused. So we get in the car, and I'm like, okay, did you tell him or did you not tell him? She's like, no, I told him everything. I'm like, but he let you do offering. And he didn't kick us out, because I was so terrified of that, because all these other stories that I heard, like, people getting sued and all these other crazy things. I was like, what? Like, how did you do offering? He's like, you let me do offering. And I'm like, what? I'm so just, I didn't know what to think. So we basically just drove home in silence, because I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what's happening right now. And so, come to find out, she tells me a little bit later after this, because we're still just beside ourselves, and we're like, okay, well, at least it's out in the open, right? I feel better, right? We're all, because those months, we're talking a couple months, I had to keep that in, right? Come to find out, she actually told a sister before she talked to the missionary when they were preaching one time. One of the sisters came up to her and was like, hey, something's bothering you. What's going on? And she just kept prodding and prodding and prodding. And Kayleen's like, okay, I'm going to tell you. And told her. And she didn't tell me she told her, because she knows I probably would have just disappeared and just been like, well, you're going to have fun raising the kids. I'm out. Right. And so.
Yeah, there was a lot.
Yeah. And not only that, but she told me after, and thankfully she did, right? Because I couldn't handle that. She knows me. I couldn't handle that. So she also tells me that when she actually got the phone from the Ascension Day, so this is 10 days before Pentecost, when she actually got the phone, it wasn't on the kids app that we had before, and the message that she had saved in there was deleted with and it had like a bunch of smiley faces or something, or a bunch of emojis in its place, which means somebody got into the phone, deleted the message, and left a bunch of weird emojis. And it wasn't, in fact, on the kids YouTube weird. That she told me it was. But I'm glad she did, because again, I would have died.
Yeah, I knew you wouldn't have been able to handle that.
Yeah, and so I'm just going along for the ride at this point. And after Pentecost, I'm just like, I just don't care anymore. Like, kill me, shoot,
Yeah.
Like, Like,
This sounds
throw me out, keep
exhausting.
me in. I was so, the 6 months from about January to August was the most exhausting months of my life. And then, so her story kind of stopped there because a couple of weeks after that, they had a sermon and it was a Sabbath day, basically calling out what she did, but using other examples, kind of like I know like, this is kind of pretty common. Like, I know you guys don't do this, but let me just talk about it anyway. But you know very well that what he's about to talk about is exactly what's going on in the church. Kind of like, not to be rude, but I'm about to be very rude to you. You know what I mean? Kind of like that.
Right.
And so basically, the sermon was about her indirectly, and so she got offended. And I remember she didn't come to service. This was the first time in 10 years she didn't come to a service. And
Well, no, I didn't. It was because he was like, I have answers for you for the meeting that we had. I mean, there's just so many other details, but
there is, but not enough
yeah,
time.
yeah. But basically, it was because they, rather than giving me the answers, they were just, that was like the response, is like, don't ask questions. That was the point of the
Yeah.
sermon. It's like, don't question.
That asking
Yeah.
questions is bad. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that was like the point of the sermon. So
And
that's
so-
why I was like, okay, this is I guess the answer that we're getting is not to ask
Is
questions.
to be quiet, right?
Yeah.
And so this kind of starts my coming out, right? Because up until this point, I am like full-fledged, like, still, like, I haven't listened to any videos, I haven't listened to any of the podcasts. Like, I'm still just like cognitive dissonance away. And so after that point, she stopped coming and was coming very irregularly. And that's when they started to really push me into being more active, because basically the consensus was the more I do for the church now at this point, the more I sacrifice, suffer, etc. for the church, the more Father Mother will guide my family back to the church, right? Or will save her on the last day, right? But if I leave, right, she has no chance. My kids have no chance. And so that was kind of the way I was being coerced into continuing and, basically keeping up what I was doing. And then eventually Kayleen, she asked me a question and she said, because she brought up a bunch of things. And to this point, I'm like, okay, I get all that, but what's the alternative? Right? So this kind of comes back to that question of why I named the channel that. She kept asking the question, we kept asking ourselves, well, what's the alternative, right? Passover, right? Sabbath day, King David, Melchizedek, fig tree, all these things. We're like, who else fulfilled them? What's the alternative? Where are you going to go? And that's something that is actually taught in the church too. Like, the overseers all the time would be like, who else keeps the Passover? Who else keeps the Sabbath day? Who else fulfilled all these prophecies? I'll go to that church. What's the alternative? There is none, right? That's kind of the consensus. And so that was the question I had was, what's the alternative? That's the same thing I was repeating to her. And she asked me something very wise. She said, how can you find the alternative if you're not going to let go of something that's not, right? Like, something that's not true, right? Like, how are you going to find something else if you're not even going to research? How are you going to find something else if you can't look? How can you find something you're not allowed to look for, you won't let yourself look for? Right? So when she was basically talking to me like that, it made a whole lot of sense to me, because I was like, And I remember too, I was taught all the time, like, if it's 1% false and 99% true, what is it overall? It's still false. It's not true by definition. And that's something they taught me in the church. And I just remember so many times those kind of things that I would say to people came back to haunt me, right? Because we found more than 1%, right? And there's like an example too, like, if I have a gallon of water and I put a drop of poison in it, will you drink it? It's just a drop of poison, right? They kind of use that for like slander, right? Or something like that, where it's just, but they came back.
All these examples that we would use on other churches, they were coming back on us.
They're coming back on us. Like, my own words were coming to bite me. Like, I experienced that in real time.
Yeah.
And so my whole approach to it was, I started researching too, because I was like, look, at this point, it was either the church or my wife, basically, because they were really tugging on me to, serve more, do more for the church. But also, I want to be her husband. I want to be the dad. I want to do my patriarchal duties, for lack of a better word. Which brings me to another point. The church doesn't unless the church allows you, you won't be a dad, right? When I go to when you go to the church, you're not allowed in the kids' room half the time, right? For instance, like when my second daughter was born, Ivy, my wife had contractions during prayer week for Pentecost in 2019, and I remember she had to go in at like 3 a.m, but prayer service was at 5 a.m. And so I had to leave her in the hospital alone with contractions. Sorry, okay. I had to leave her alone in the dark room, basically alone with contractions, and I had to take my 1-year-old and go to service. Right? I wasn't allowed to be a dad at that point. I wasn't allowed to be a husband at that point because the church didn't allow me to be there with her. Right? Because, Father Mother will take care of her. We need you at the church. Right? Mm-hmm. They don't allow you to be a son unless they allow you to be a son, then you can be a son. Right? I couldn't go to my dad's funeral or my dad's birthday because it's a Sabbath day. I wasn't allowed. Right? I couldn't break the Sabbath. So that's in a way how they kind of separate, families, is because you can only be a husband if the church lets you be a husband.
And it's like they won't say like you're not allowed to do that. It's more like the psychology of it. Like they're like it's according to your faith, and then it's more just like psychology. It's not like they say you're not allowed.
Well, they do say that like if you Sabbath, you go to hell. If you don't do these things, you go to hell. But they're like, but it's your choice, right?
Yeah,
it's your choice. Right.
Yeah, I have a it's like, oh yeah, you're just going to go to Lake of Fire, but it's your choice.
It's when they say it's according to your faith, that's just another way of saying, if you have the sort of faith that's going to avoid hell, you won't do this, but it's your choice. You can do it if you have the sort of faith that's going to send you to the Lake of Fire, but hey, we're not telling you what to do.
Yeah, we're not forcing you.
Yeah.
It's just
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that kind of started me coming out because I had to make a choice. I had to either side with my wife or side with the church, right? Because at this point, I couldn't have both. She was out, right? My kids didn't want to go because the kids' room's just, terrible. And so I had to make a choice. And so I did a bunch of research, and I stopped keeping third day first. And that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I remember literally I was in the parking lot, basically almost next to Zion. Like there's a Maverick next to Zion, and I was just sitting there, just watching the time go to 8 p.m., which is a service time. And I remember once it hit 8:01, I just felt like so just like, like just so defeated because at that point they have such a hold on you because me and my wife were talking, and she's like, really, like like you can go if you want, but we're not coming. And we were in the car together, and I was like, no, I'm not going to go because, I want to be with you guys. Like, I'm going to be a dad. I want to be husband, right? Like, I want to be with you guys, my family, But then I just remember, like, I changed my mind, and I started driving to the church.
We were driving home to the freeway, and then he was like, he just started driving to the church.
Yeah, I started driving to the church, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't miss service. I can't, right?
Okay.
I can't. And you're just like, oh, okay.
And I was just like, well, I just don't want you to do something that is not right. Because you were like, I know that third day is not in the Bible.
Right. At that point, I was not convinced about third day, but it was still very hard to not go. And so I remember we pulled up there's a Maverick right next to Zion. And I just remember sitting there and just seeing, like, it was 7:45, 7:50, 7:55, and then 8 p.m. And I almost was like, oh, I gotta go. Like, it was just so my adrenaline was going.
Yeah, you were like, I think I'm going to do it. You're like, I think I have to go.
And I have to go. And then I was like, okay. And then it was 8:01, and after 8:01, I was like, just felt so defeated and so just like.
And you just sent a text message to the leader.
Yeah, and I was like, hey, I'm not going to make it, and then just started driving back. But that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. I mean, really, it was, because just the mental prison I was in and how I somehow broke out of it was really difficult. And then so after that, I stopped keeping third day, but I was still keeping the Sabbath because obviously the Sabbath is in the Bible. But then I really started researching, and I was just like, okay, I can't be half in, half out, right? I already missed third day. I can't be half in and half out. I'm either wasting my time, or I just need to go back and full-fledged it. And so I started researching a bunch of stuff. And I mean, for the sake of time, I won't get into all the things I found online, but essentially, even though I found all these crazy things online that actually have a lot of proof to back them up, by the way.
Like the things in Korean.
Yeah, I had to translate them in Korean and stuff, but
so he had to search in Korean these things.
Yeah, I had to basically take what I wanted to say, translate it in Korean, copy and paste the Korean, and search for that to find these things.
Okay.
And so, and I kind of go into some of that on my channel, so I'm not going to go too much into it here. But at the end of the day, even after that, I still wasn't fully convinced that it was wrong, because the Bible is the only source, right? The Bible is the only, at the end of the day, Bible's the source that I need. And then I remember studying with a missionary who actually came out. He's actually been out for a year or two, and he was in for 20 years in San Diego. San Diego. And he was actually talking to me, and this is like a whole no-brainer, or you don't talk to ex-members, right? Like that's a no-no. And I remember him asking me questions, and those are kind of the questions that I started with asking my overseer, right? And the questions were like with the weeds and wheat. When you read the prophecy, the wheat remains. The wheat is never uprooted. Not only that, but there's never a second planting of the wheat. But the WMSCOG says the wheat is the Passover and the Sabbath day. Mm-hmm. And they say the Sabbath day was abolished 321 and Passover was abolished 325. But by them being abolished, it means that actually is not the wheat. Because Jesus' word says that the wheat remains until the very end. Mm-hmm. Right? Even there's a part in the prophecy where the field hands or the field servants are going to go pull up the weeds, and even the farmer stops him and says no, right? Because he's that concerned about the wheat being uprooted. So, and so I remember actually, because we were still open-minded at that point. I wasn't really in it at that point. I was on my way out. And I remember at that point, I told everybody, I'm like, look, I'll always study with you, but I'm going to ask questions now. And if you can't answer my questions, then that's it, right? And so I remember meeting with my missionary quite a few times, actually, after I stopped keeping service. I studied with them, and I was cordial, and I was just like, yeah, I have these questions, and I need answers. And one was about the new name, right? They say the new name is Ahnsahnghong, and you need that name in order to be saved, right? But when you read the prophecy in Revelation 2, the new name is not the new name of Christ. It's it's a new name given to the person who overcomes, right? And so you get the new name, you get your new name after you overcome. So I'm like, okay, if you need the new name to overcome, why is it given to you after you overcome? It doesn't make any sense. Is there two new names you get? I don't get it.
Yeah.
And then also with Revelation 3, that is Christ's new name. But the thing is, though, is you get the new name of Christ. He writes the new name on you after you overcome, in both senses. And so I asked my mission overseer, I was like, okay, so how do you justify, oh, you need the new name to be saved, but then you get a new name after you're saved, like when you go to heaven, or Christ gets a new name after you go to heaven when you overcome. Is there a fourth name of God? Like, no, of course not. And WMSCOG doesn't teach that. And so basically there was no answer to that, right? And I kind of go into that. I go into great detail on that on my channel.
I think the biggest point was about mother sacrifice.
That was another one.
That's the biggest point, I think.
So that was kind of the first study I had, and we kind of, there was a non-answer, and he's like, well, I'll get back to you, right? And then, so the second time I studied with them, I asked them another question. I said, the Bible teaches very clearly, and we even teach, that Christ is sacrificed once for the sins of the world, right? So Christ sacrifices in his body on the cross to deal away with all sin, right? And I remember the first time I asked this, it was basically, well, Christ's sacrifice, the first answer I got was, well, Christ's sacrifice paid for the sins in heaven and up to that point. And then now we need mother sacrifice to basically, in the last days, to be able to receive forgiveness of sins. But then I asked again, and this was a deacon that told me this. But then the missionary came and said, oh, well, actually, no, Jesus did sacrifice for all of our sins. I was like, okay, so we're in agreement with that, right? Jesus sacrificed once for all sins. And I said, okay, if that's the case, what sin did Jesus sacrifice for? What sin does mother pay for? Because they teach mother sacrifice on the Tuesday and Saturday evening worship as the burnt offering in Numbers chapter 19. I said, what sin is mother sacrificing for that Jesus didn't pay for? The Bible teaches Jesus paid for all sins. If he doesn't pay for all sins, it means, what did he die for? And it means I have no relation with Jesus, because if he didn't die for my sin in the last days, what's the point of him coming? And in that case, if you're going to say Jesus sacrificed for all sins, and you're going to agree with that, okay, then what sin does mother pay for that Jesus didn't pay for? You can't have both, right? And so then I asked that question in that way, and we ended up watching a sermon about the Day of Atonement, where they say mother is the reality of the Day of Atonement. Basically, she carries our sin all year, and then sanctuary is cleansed, and scapegoat Satan off to the wilderness and dies, basically, which is actually Seventh-day Adventist teaching and stuff. But anyway, so we watched that, and he's like, does that answer your question? I said, no, because my question was, what sin does mother pay for that Jesus didn't pay for? And so he asked the deacon to go get the book called God the Father and God the Mother, which basically he went up and got it and came down, and he opened a passage and read the exact same thing. Mother is being sacrificed as a sin offering on the third and seventh day for the forgiveness of our sins. How grateful we are, right? And so I was like, okay, I get she sacrifices sin. Like, I've taught that. I've read that. What sin does she pay for that Jesus didn't pay for? And they looked at me straight in the face and said, oh, mother's sacrifice just means, sacrificing for our sins just means her gospel work. And I was shocked, because I had been guilt tripped into keeping third and seventh day, because I was taught mother is being burnt to ashes for my sin in vain if I don't attend. And for him to say, oh, it just means her gospel work. And he began to tell me about one time in Korea where she listened to him preach at 12 a.m. or something like that. And I'm like, that's cool and that's great. Still doesn't answer my question. Yeah. What sin did mother pay for that Jesus didn't? Oh, it just means her gospel work. That's what it means. I'm like, we watched a 30-minute sermon and read a chapter out of a book that said otherwise. But then you just look me in the face and say, oh, it just means her gospel work. Wow. And even the deacon next to me kind of had his head just down like this.
He knew.
He knew.
He knew, right? It wasn't good. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the last question I had was the weeds and the wheat, right? I asked, how does the wheat, the Bible says the wheat remains, right? It is not uprooted. There is no second planting or restoration, if you will. And the answer was, well, God comes and shows us who the wheat is or what the wheat is, right? Because we don't really know what the wheat is. But I'm like, that's not what we teach. We teach that Sabbath, Passover, veil, the feast, that is the wheat Jesus planted. But then we also teach it was abolished, meaning uprooted, gone, destroyed. It's not about, oh, well, we kind of know what a wheat is, and God comes and shows us what the wheat is. Like, so they changed the whole meaning of the prophecy, right? Mm-hmm. Even still, it doesn't answer it, because it's like, okay, but so you have to agree that the wheat remains until the end. We just don't know what the wheat is. Mm-hmm. And so there was no real answer to that, because basically they just opened the green book and said, well, Ahnsahnghong said it was destroyed. I'm like, okay, that's great. But again, you remove 3 chapters, from this book. So how am I supposed to put stock in this? How am I supposed to understand? Wow. And just there were so many questions, like with Daniel's prophecy, how, the saints are handed over to him for times and half a time for 1260 years. And that's the reign of the papacy, right? Which is also Seventh-day Adventist teaching. And I was like, okay, if the saints are handed over to him for times and half a time for 1200 years, Ahnsahnghong said that after 325, the truth was destroyed. Meaning, if there's no truth, there's no saints. So how are the saints being handed over for 1260 years if the saints don't exist?
Yep.
Right? There's these questions
that goes along with I think it's Hebrews 9:28 when it says he will return a second time for those who are eagerly waiting for him. A verse that the WMS likes to use a lot, but the question should be asked, in their minds, the truth is at that point is gone, and he's Ahnsahnghong, who in their minds is Christ returning a second time in Hebrews 9:28. But who are those that are eagerly waiting for his return if the truth is lost and the saints are gone
And he
has to come and restore the truth? Yeah. Who's waiting for him? Who is, yeah.
Yeah. And even, it says eagerly too in some cases where it says, "For eagerly await his coming." It's like, how can you eagerly await if you don't know what's coming? Like, if you show up at my, it's like if I show up at your house, Jordan, are you going to be eagerly waiting for me? You're like, what are you doing here? Like, what?
Yeah. I'll be surprised. I'll be like, oh, I didn't expect that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
the other one we had was Matthew chapter 7, where it says, watch out for false Christ, in those
20.
Oh, yes. 7:24. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll let you.
Ow. Yeah. So Matthew 24, right? They love Matthew 24, verse 20, where it talks about even in the last days, basically, you need to keep the Sabbath, right? But then if you read like 2 verses down, it says, and in those days, right, meaning in the same time frame you're allegedly supposed to keep the Sabbath,
the last days,
if anyone comes to you and says, look, there's the Christ, look, there he is, look, he's out in the country, don't believe it. Like, he said it over and over and over again. But they're like, oh, well, that's just for the disciples at that time. But that's not how it reads. You can't say that the Sabbath here is for us, but the verses that say in those days, right? If somebody said, like, meaning at the same time as talking about you should keep the Sabbath, that's actually talking about just the apostles 2,000 years ago. It's not talking about our time frame per se.
Yeah, they have a lot of cases where they have to interject their own commentary. They can't just read the verse. They have to interject a commentary to go with it. So for example, when we would read that, if anyone says, here he is out in the wilderness, watch out for false Christ. After we would read that, there was always this example told about about handbags, and if there's the real handbag, or if there's fake handbags, it means that there's a real, they'd say Gucci, right? Just because you see fake Gucci handbags, it doesn't mean that there's not a real one. It actually means that there's a real one. So there's this analogy that goes along with it. And I think there was another, a couple more that.
And I find it interesting now. I find it interesting now how they take things that are, biblically speaking, figurative, and take it extremely literal. And then they take things that are extremely literal and make them completely figurative. Right? For instance, when we talk about Job.
They're really bad at that. Yeah.
Yeah, like Job, right? Clearly God is basically making fun of Job. And those who are in the church know what I'm talking about. I don't need to explain too much, but it's like if I'm driving my car all the time with my kids in the back seat, and they're like, Daddy, you shouldn't turn like that. I turn around and say the same thing. Where were you when I was taking the driving test? Where were you when I was studying? Where were you when I was in the car simulator? Surely you know, right? Because you're so old, right? Yeah. You have your license.
Yep.
It's the same thing, right?
It's sarcasm.
God's basically making fun of you. Mm-hmm. And with Proverbs, they clearly misread, that it's actually wisdom, and it's referring to she being with God, and it's a metaphor.
Did you want to talk about the homeless person?
Oh, yes. One thing I think that I really need to say, obviously there's more, and we can probably pick it up at maybe another time or something, but
yeah, for sure.
One thing that I've really has hit me hard is the homeless. So in 2021, I went to Chicago, and there was a short term there, which is basically you go there and you preach for a week, and you pay for everything, obviously, because you pay tithe and you also pay for everything. So I went there, and I remember we were preaching to a gentleman who, he had gym shorts on and had a backpack and a hoodie and stuff, and it's streets of Chicago. I'm not from there. I'm from Utah. So I don't know who's who and what's the bad places and where, and this is during the Lollapalooza festival. And so there's crazy people everywhere. drunk. Like it was insane. Anyway, so I'm preaching to this gentleman, and how this is set up is there was an office building, and it was the second floor. That was where the church was. So you had to go into an elevator and go up to the church and walk down the hallway and then go into the office space, which is where they kept service and baptized and stuff. And there was no cars, so we'd walk blocks, right? And if somebody wanted to be baptized, we would actually walk as far as we walked out. We would walk back, take him into the office building, go up the elevator, and then go into the church to get baptized. So this gentleman was probably 4 or 5 blocks away to where he accepted the message. We walked him 4 or 5 blocks. Like it took like a 20-minute walk to get him to the church. Went into the office building, went up the elevator, went in, right? And we're still kind of studying with him, still teaching him and stuff. And then we're like, you should be baptized because you want the seal of God, right? The same thing, right? Like the fear, right? Like, hey, World War III is coming. Come keep the Passover and you'll be saved, even though it doesn't protect you from or COVID or anything like that. But it'll protect you from World War III, right? So, I'm feeding him this, right? And then he's like, yeah, I want to get baptized. I want that to happen to me. I'm like, yeah, neither do I. So that's why we keep the Passover, right? You need to get baptized to keep the Passover, right? And so he gets his robes on, right? He's getting ready, and now they have you fill out the baptism form. And when they got to the baptism form, so he's all dressed in his robe, right, ready to go. And
oh no,
yeah, and so they're like,
where
"What's
this
your
is
address?"
going.
They're like, "What's your address?" And he's like, "I don't have an address. I sometimes sleep at the shelter." And I was against homeless people because that's what I was taught. I was like, "Oh man, like now we're not going to bear fruit, right?" Because that was my mind at the time.
You didn't say that.
No, I thought that, right? That was in my mind. Like, like how did I felt so foolish. Like I brought a homeless person into Zion. Like, oh my gosh, like so embarrassing. That's how I was thinking at the time because that's how they kind of teach you to think, right?
Yep.
And so basically at that point, obviously the baptism stopped, right? We told them to take off the robes and to get dressed again. And we basically had to tell them, hey, you need to get your life together. And when you get your life together, like come back and then you can get baptized. I basically had to shoo him off, walk him out and be like, yeah, okay, bye. And then, and everyone was like consoling us after, like, oh, you almost got one. Like, it's okay. Like, yeah, those homeless people, they're little tricky devils. And, actually we had an education about it. You weren't there because we actually arrived late. I'm like, yeah, you got to watch out for the homeless people. You got to make sure, because they're tricky. So the people who say they are not biased or they're not biased towards homeless people is a complete lie. Like this guy was ready to receive the message. He was ready to believe what I was feeding him. He was ready.
He was in the baptism.
He was in the baptism robe, and we're basically just like, nah, you're not getting baptized. You're basically not worthy enough to receive salvation at this point. You need to get your crap together, and then you can come receive salvation.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And at that time, I thought that was totally normal, right? I'm like, oh man, and I was even like, yeah, we'll get them next time. That was, oh man, those homeless people. But now I'm like, I just feel disgusted with myself. I'm just like, oh, Jesus' whole point was homeless people. Like Jesus' whole point was poor people, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't even occur to me like that's who the gospel. Like, if you actually research the epistles of Paul, most of the time he was talking to Gentile slaves who were little knowledge, didn't have much money, didn't have anything at all, right? They were mostly Gentile slaves. And when that put that in perspective for me, I'm just like, but at the time you're just like, oh yeah, and
that's supposed to be
that's the norm.
That they can have life.
That's the norm, right? Because I remember we did a burrito project where we handed out burritos to homeless people, but we were told not to tell them the address of the church, right? It was just for a service project, right? But we weren't we were not supposed to preach to them, right?
Yeah.
Did you take pictures for that?
Oh, for sure. And what's interesting is actually one of the brothers got hit by a car and broke his leg on that night. But Passover, right?
It's funny because everyone in history who's ever kept Passover has died like a gruesome.
To anyone listening, everyone who is listening to this, name one person who has kept Passover and is alive.
like
right?
in the time of the apostles.
Like really, like
they were maimed.
like seriously, like the
I'm upset.
Israelites
Yeah.
kept the Passover in Exodus. What happened? Most of them died. I mean, everyone eventually died, right? Josiah.
And most of them were not natural deaths.
Yeah, and Josiah, their poster boy for the Old Testament Reformation of keeping the Passover, he was killed immediately after keeping the Passover, like immediately. Jesus wasn't even spared apparently because he kept the Passover, but he died. Right? The apostles, they were all martyred, but they kept the Passover. And it's like, okay, so Passover doesn't stop COVID. It doesn't stop a cough. It doesn't stop you from breaking your leg, getting hit by a car. It doesn't stop you from being killed or martyred. But
Yep.
yeah, let's keep pretending like it protects us from
yeah,
which puts them in members
it's not
in a
quite
very
the lucky charm
situation.
that they say it is.
Yeah, and it puts members in a false sense of security, which is dangerous, right? Like,
Yeah.
like I can't tell you how many times we put ourselves in dangerous situations because we thought we had Passover, right?
Yep.
Like I went to Chicago in 2021. Like, like if that's not testing God, I don't know what is.
So it sounds like you had a lot of questions and you asked a lot of questions. You went and researched and you looked at different verses and things that didn't add up. And then you took these things to the leadership and they cannot provide you with answers, which is that's the story that we hear all the time. And so, I hope that those listening to this, especially members, that you hear that and one, be encouraged to ask the hard questions and to dig into the hard questions, but then consider why it is that this church that claims to be, the one true church, the only church that can properly lead you to the truth of the Bible, why is it that they can't answer some of these questions? They can't solve some of these issues. And the answers that they do give just contradict what they've said before and in major ways very often. So from, it sounds like you just couldn't find answers. And so I'm assuming then that kind of the final straw, where did you feel, did that help you kind of feel some freedom to just disconnect entirely?
Yeah, because at that time I did stop going because of what I found online, but I just wanted to be sure, right? Because you don't want to live your life not being sure of your choice, especially something as big as leaving a church or leaving a religion. And so I basically was like, okay, this is my last shot, right? Like I have put up with everything else. I have been more than patient, more than willing to hear everything and anything, right? And even to this day, I am willing to study with anyone, right? Like if a missionary approaches me and wants to study with me, cool, right? But I'm still going to ask him the same hard questions. And so that kind of just the non-answers basically just was a testament to me that I made the right decision, right? Because again, the reason why I started my channel too is called Find the Alternative, right? Because the whole point is to help you find your alternative as I'm finding my alternative, which is Jesus, basically. It's very simple. But the reason I started my channel too is because, the WMSCOG kind of says, oh, why are you targeting us? Why are you attacking us or something like that? All of their educations are based off attacking other churches, saying these churches keep Sunday, they're devil worshippers, sun god worshippers, they're going to hell. The other churches keep Christmas and all these other things. They make a big deal out of all these little things and put them down and say they're false prophets, Satan's their father, and they're going to hell and stuff. It's like, okay, but if you're going to make those kind of things, right? If you're going to make those kind of points, your truth needs to be airtight, right? You can't just accuse other people and then turn around and do the exact same thing, right? They say false prophets, like in Mormonism and all these other places, they say these things happen or they prophesy something and it doesn't happen. But then they'll say, oh, but Ahnsahnghong is the true Christ, even though his prophecy failed too. He's just testing your faith, but they're false because reason, and so if the WMSCOG was just like, you know what, we're all just doing our best, everyone's great, everyone's good, we're just doing our best, we're doing it our way, other people want to do it their way, that's fine with us, but that's not how it is. It's we're the truth, we're nothing but the truth. If you're not with us, you're going to hell. And so with that kind of doctrine,
then they act like it's so shocking and so unbelievable when anybody will say anything negative back toward them, or even just respond to some of their criticisms of other churches, and then you point one little criticism back toward them, and they're like, how can you? Why are you picking on us? Why aren't you picking on churches like the Catholic Church and it's just the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy there is just really crazy to see in the members.
It's like a modern day.
I'm sure you see that in your comments on your videos a lot, because I know that's something I see all the time on mine.
Yeah, and it's all proof texting too. Like they all use Acts chapter 5. Oh, if it's from man, it will fail, and if it's from God, it won't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then they teach about the restoration. It's like you're literally saying Jesus failed. There's a restoration. It means you think Jesus failed, because according to the Gamaliel, he said if it's from man, it will fail. You're saying the gospel failed. You're saying Christ failed, right? The truth was abolished. It was destroyed. Sounds like a failure to me.
Yeah.
Right. And so their own verses that they use to prove their points disproves them. Right.
Yeah. Because you could also, that same verse, if it's from God, then it'll stand. If it's not, it'll fail. Well, then I guess Mormonism is true, even more true than the WMS and Islam and countless other groups. Pepsi Cola must be from God, because it certainly is prospering, infinitely more than organizations like the WMSCOG. So it's just a nonsense argument. It's an argument that makes the member feel better in the moment and allows them to stay kind of to keep their eyes closed and not have to deal with the information in front of them.
And they think that the only ones that can
nothing to it.
They think that the only ones that use those verses, like you look at Shinji's videos, you see the same verses being used. You look at the Mooney's videos, you see the same thing. You look at Mormon's videos, you see the same. Like there's nothing new under the sun, right? It's all been done.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to. We didn't like really. I feel like we didn't come out on our own. Like I feel like we really just we prayed a lot, and I feel like our family was praying for us a lot too. And so somehow we came out and we still believe in God and and we still are able to obviously read the Bible and everything without being triggered. And so I feel like we sort of came out in the right way, because I feel like a lot of cases it's like members, they just get to the point where they feel like, okay, I'm okay with going to hell. Mm-hmm. And it's just that is a terrible mental place to be in.
It's painful.
And so I wanted to say thank you to the members who the former members who came out and who have spoken on, and to you, Jordan, and to everyone, because that really helped us, I feel like, to come out in the right way, because I was, while we were kind of in our process of leaving, I was just I was listening to all of the interviews and the podcast and everything. And I was like, okay, I'm building up my, just mental ammunition, I guess.
Yeah. I have a couple of things I just want to say really quick before, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Basically just words to members who are in it. Right, if you're watching this video,
that was actually going to be my last question, anyways, or questions, was just to say if you have any advice or kind of having come out of it and been through everything you guys have been through, and every story is unique. Every member's who's come out, their stories are different, and your guys' certainly is different. There's different nuances and aspects to it that we haven't heard before on this channel, and so it's always nice to be able to ask you guys, what would you say in the way of advice or encouragement or anything like that to, members still in it, or people that maybe are newly coming out of it, or anybody kind of involved at whatever level they're at.
Yeah. So our advice basically would be two types of advice, right? Because you kind of referenced two types of people. The first one is for members who are in. If it's 1% false and it's 99% true, it can't be true. It can't be 100% true. So if it's not 100% true, it has to be false. Kind of like with like the examples they use. If I put a drop of poison in a gallon of water, right? Are you going to drink it? You're not going to drink it, right? You're no way. But yet we see all these fallacies, we see all these contradictions, we see all these issues, and we keep drinking the water. It's like, why? I get it, and I was there, but seriously, just kind of stop and just ask these questions. And my advice is just read the scriptures and take your sermon books, take those verses that you have in your sermon book, get rid of the analogies, the transitions, all those kind of things, and see if you can still put those verses together and come to the same conclusion, right? Without the analogies, without the mental gymnastics, see if you can come to the same conclusion. Just read the verse for what it is and see if you can still come to the same conclusion that the WMSCOG says you will. Just try it, honestly. Did you have anything?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say is that, a lot of people, when they come out, like members that come out, they kind of just feel like, well, I don't really want to believe in God anymore. Like why would God put me through this? And I feel like at least for me, I've sort of kind of understood, the way that I've kind of understood it is that, like, basically, if you imagine back then, the Jews were doing all this stuff, right? They were sacrificing and doing all these things. And then Jesus came and he redeemed them, right? He said, okay, you're free from this. You don't have to do it anymore. So I feel like to the Jews, Jesus's coming was a lot more valuable than to the Gentiles, right? So and so I feel like we were like the Jews, like we were doing all the stuff. And so I feel like that, and I guess if you decide to come out and you're like, no, I'm not even going to touch the Bible anymore. Like from like a physical perspective, I think this, like, learning about this is incredibly valuable, because if you think about it, like most of the world's major problems have to do with like this, like, I guess you could call it brainwashing, right? These psychological, like suicide bombers and like, the Holocaust, everything like that. Like, you wonder how people do those, can do those things. And I think the members who come out, they have an opportunity because they have experienced that for themselves. They know, and I think there's so much research to be done on, like, the psychological, like, I'm fascinated by all of that. Like,
and I would say to members who are on their way coming out, I know it's scary, I know it's confusing, and I know that you feel like you have no place to go and there's no one who can help you. That's not true. That's how the cult wants you to feel. It's not true. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to a bunch of people that I know. Like, you're not alone. Everyone goes through what you're going through, the pain, the anger, the fear, everything you can name. Like, we've all gone through it. So I want you to know that you're not alone, but it is time for you to have courage, and it's time for you to stand up for yourself. It's time for you to stand up for your family, whether that be your parents, whether that be your kids, whether that be your wife or your husband. It's time for you to put you first for once, and know that this isn't right. These things don't add up. It's time for you to stand up for yourself and have courage. And it's hard. But there's people who can help. I'm always available, and I know a bunch of people who are more than willing to help. There's a community. And then I guess the last thing I would say is probably just as important is the family who has, their son, their dad, their, some family members in the church. I would say the most important thing is not to give up hope, because for 10 years we were impenetrable. Like, we've suffered so much from, whether my mom or Kayleen's mom or our family sending us things, internet, like, you mean anything you could imagine, right? But we're just like, no, 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 no. So, we were branch church leaders for a little bit. We were house church leaders. We had the church in our house for a couple of years. We were unit leaders. And so I really just want to encourage the family members to.
There's hope still.
Don't give up hope, because that's all you have, and that's something that the cult can't take from you. And what I recommend for the family members of the people in there is, you have to be patient. You have to listen to your family, right? So your family members in the church, but you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to let them talk. You have to be willing to at least acknowledge what they believe. Because if you just shut it off, say it's a cult, you kind of have a wall up, that's going to make a wall go up for them too.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would recommend is listen to them and let them talk, let them give their spill, let them, say what they need to say, and then just ask questions about what they said, right? They're going to teach you about the weeds and weeds. Ask the questions I just asked, right? Or certain other prophecies, right? If you come at it from a non-threatening, unbiased perspective, and you let them talk, but then you ask the hard questions that will make them think, right? I'm not saying they're going to come out automatically, but words are seeds. If you ask them those questions that they know that they can't answer, neither can their missionaries, neither can the general pastor or even mother, eventually those seeds will grow, because human nature, we're analytical creatures, right? You can't sleep until you figure something out, right? Like if there's something you really want to figure out and something that's eating at you, you have to figure it out. That's just our nature.
Yeah, I feel like if it was my kid, I would say the same thing. Like I would even go there and study with them. But like, first of all, knowing knowing that,
like, she's even gone back after we got kicked out, and it shocked everybody because that's not the norm, right?
I went there and I just brought some gifts, and the overseer was like kind of shocked that I was there, and he kind of tried to like hurry me past the members. But everybody came up behind me, and I was in my jeans on the Sabbath.
Right.
Like, I was just like, "Yep, I'm here. I'm not keeping service." And so,
and another thing I would say too is, even if you find stuff online to the family members, even if you find stuff online, I wouldn't bring it up, because the church already has a hold of that. They already have so many defenses against that, to where unless they themselves find it and read it, if you send it to them or something, anything you find online, even if you do find it, right? I'm not saying don't research. Of course, research. I'm just saying don't mention it. Don't say anything about it. Because as soon as they know that you researched online, automatically everything you say from there on out is discredited.
Yeah.
I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. It's 100% true.
And I honestly, I would tell them, like, I'll join your church if you can answer these questions, and then bring up the questions like mother's sacrifice.
You have to have that attitude.
Does Jesus take away all sins, or does mother, so.
Yeah, as much as you want to fight and just be like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And, of course it is, right? I'm not saying it's not, but it's not the information, it's how you present the information. Like if you go and say, I understand what you're trying to say about Ahnsahnghong, I understand what you're trying to say about mother or whatever, right? Just ask the question, ask the hard questions. I mean, you might have to be more familiar with the Bible, but if that's your loved one, you kind of have to be, right? You have to be knowledgeable about what they teach, and you have to be knowledgeable about what the Bible actually teaches. And you have to present the question not in a way where I'm going to stump you or something. It's more of a kind of like gaslight yourself a little bit, like, hey, I know what you're trying to say and it makes sense, but I just can't get over, for instance, like weeds and wheat. Right? I know you're trying to say that the Passover is the wheat and Sabbath is the wheat, but where does it say the wheat is uprooted? Right? I just don't see that here. Can you explain that to me? Something like non-threatening like that, to where, they're like, oh, yeah, let me try and explain, because then they have to think, because
Yep.
they want to save you, right? So you have to think about them too. They're trying to save you.
Yeah, so just ask questions to make them think and don't give up hope. So I know we have had a long
Yeah. So
closing.
No, that's real. That's a good. I think that's a really good way of putting that. It's not. It's not that the questions themselves or the information that you might discover is bad or is not like powerful in showing the problems with the WMS, but it's equally or maybe even more important how you present those questions and how you bring those up. That's going to make all the difference about whether that member is going to be able to hear it or if their defenses are just going to, immediately fly up because they've been programmed by the WMS. And so you got to kind of, what you're doing, I think, Adam, is helping people understand how to kind of sneak past those defenses, how to kind of get into an actual conversation with a member without, throwing off all those alarms, without sending all these warning signals off in that person's brain. They're just going to send them running away. And
yeah, it's kind of like a Trojan horse.
Putting a shell up.
Mm-hmm. And with you, when I was, like when you were in and I wasn't, I was like, okay, I'm like, rather than separating our family, I'm still going to go to all the services. I'm still going to go, but I'm just going to pray I'm not going to pray in Ahnsahnghong.
Yeah, cause she never pushed me to leave. Right?
I think that was really what.
Yeah. And I know for the family members, it's painful and it's frustrating and it's confusing and it's just like, God. But I would just recommend stop and think about the other side too. What the members going through. They don't hate you. Yep. They're not trying to separate from you. They're trying to save you too. So if you use that and it opens the door, right? If you're willing to listen to them and you just simply ask non-threatening questions, but like, I want to believe, I really do, but can you explain this to me through the Bible? Why you're believing this? Because I just can't see it. Maybe I'm just dumb, or you have to gaslight yourself.
Yep.
Right. Because once they know you know something, or they think you know something, you're just trying to stump them. It's over. Right. But if they think, oh, there's a chance I can save my family, and they're listening to me, they've never listened before. But then you ask those questions in a very non-threatening way, in a very insightful way, like, hey, I want to believe, I get it, but I just can't get over this part, right? Can you explain that to me more? Why do you say the wheat was destroyed? Can you explain that to me?
And then you, instead of like making an argument to them about why the WMS is wrong and why this verse proves that the WMS teaching is wrong, you're actually, by just asking them the question in the way you're presenting, allows them to develop that question and that doubt themselves. It allows them to kind of come to that problem in their own minds as you're asking that. They'll be like, hopefully they'll think about it and they'll look into it, and then they'll realize, wait a minute, even if they don't maybe right up front say it, they're hopefully the goal is to give them like that wait a minute kind of moment where they'll realize something's not adding up here.
Like the next 2 or 3 times they teach that, they're going to have that in their mind and be like, wait, because as they're teaching it, you have to think about it. And how can you not think about that?
Yeah. And when you have family members that you
want to
come in, you're kind of more accountable because you're like, oh, what if they ask me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yeah. Well, guys, this has been really fun. I'm so thankful that your story turned out the way it did, that you got out. Kayleen, that you were persistent, and Adam's initial hesitation didn't kind of lead you to kind of back off and keep going just with the flow, sort of, but you just kept pushing out the door.
Of my part of the story, so I probably sound like a psycho from.
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff we wanted to talk about, but obviously maybe in the future or on my channel or something we can dive into it. But
yeah, definitely, and definitely everybody listening, make sure to check out Adam's channel. I'll put a link again. I'll put a link in the description of this video so you can check it out, because I know he's you've already got quite a few videos up up on the channel, and I'm
Yeah,
assuming you have plans for more.
Yeah, I have about 15 up right now. I probably have 10 more in the works.
Cool. Great. Yeah. So I think that'll be just another helpful resource for people listening here, that if you're, I know you dig into different, teachings and things like that of the church, and do some refutation stuff. And so definitely, yeah, check that out. And yeah, we could always, if you have other things that you guys want to share sometime, we can always have you back. And I know people watching this, when they're actually watching it, won't have recognized it, because I'll have done a lot of the editing, but the internet has been really problematic tonight. And so it's dropped me out of this recording, I think 4 or 5 times. And so after the editing, you probably won't notice that, but hopefully if we do have you back on sometime, it won't be like that.
She wasn't wearing a sweater in the beginning, and I guarantee you probably no one noticed that. So rewatch the video and see that she's not wearing a sweater, because she magically has a sweater on halfway through.
It just pops on.
Yeah, it's going to blow your mind, whoever's watching this. You're going to be like, what?
Yeah, there you go. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much again for sharing your story and coming on, and for going through the effort of getting a babysitter and all that.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Till next time.